Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another video by your English teacher, Miss Vic. So today we are going to jump into the last part of the metamorphosis, and we're going to break this up into a couple days, and then we will finish this story up. Okay, so Friday you did a little bit of a review of the whole story. You answered that quiz. So if you haven't done that yet, make sure you go back and at least watch the video if you can't get to the quiz, because the video is going to give you that refresher of what's going on in our story before we jump into this last part. So for today, you are going to see your attendance quiz, of course. You're going to see 2 day 8 assignments, right? So the Metamorphosis Reading quiz day 8, this is the one that actually gets graded because it's the reading quiz, okay? And then this other guy, Metamorphosis day 8 reading and video link, if you click on this, once I upload the video, there'll be a video link here, which will take you to my video. And then you will see that I have this document attached. So if you don't really like listening to the audio of it, you would rather just read it on your own, that is totally fine. You can definitely do that by clicking this and just reading the part for day 8. You'll see I have the whole part 3 on there. If you want to continue reading, you can, but you just stop whenever you get to the words day 9, okay? So all of this will post up here Monday at 9 a.m. and you will be able to jump on there. All right, so before we get into the reading, I want to wish you all a wonderful day. I want to tell you how great of a job most of you have been doing with all of this. Can you believe it? It is already May the 4th, right? We are going to be out of school in a matter of just a couple weeks. I know this isn't how we anticipated our time being together, but that's okay, right? We adapt to change and we move forward. Think about it this way. This is the week that you guys would have been taking your reading FSA. So you do not have to take that this week. We're just going to continue reading the Metamorphosis, so maybe that is a little positive. And then once we're done with the Metamorphosis, we're just going to kind of do a couple writing exercises and things like that are just going to bring us to the end of the 4th quarter. But yeah. So try to get outside, open up your windows, look at the beautiful day that it is today on Monday. The skies have been so clear all weekend. The temperatures have just been perfect. I know we're kind of stuck in our houses, but that doesn't mean you can't, peek outside a little bit and enjoy the little things. All right, guys, so I hope you enjoy the reading. I used another person's voice. Just because it's nice to switch it up a little bit. And if you'll see, as the text is scrolling on the video, you see that I have some stuff highlighted. Okay, and kind of pay attention to that stuff because chances are there's a question on the quiz about it. All right, here we go.
Part 3. No one dared to remove the apple lodged in Gregor's flesh, so it remained there as a visible reminder of his injury. He had suffered it there for more than a month, and his condition seemed serious enough to remind even his father that Gregor, despite his current sad and revolting form, was a family member who could not be treated as an enemy. On the contrary, as a family, there was a duty to swallow any revulsion for him and to be patient, just to be patient. Because of his injuries, Gregor had lost much of his mobility, probably permanently. He had been reduced to the condition of an ancient invalid, and it took him long minutes to crawl across his room. Crawling over the ceiling was out of the question, but this deterioration in his condition was fully, in his opinion, made up for by the door to the living room being left open every evening. He got into the habit of closely watching it for 1 or 2 hours before it was opened, and then, lying in the darkness of his room where he could not be seen from the living room, he could watch the family in the light of the dinner table and listen to their conversation, with everyone's permission in a way, and thus differently from before. They no longer held the lively conversations of earlier times, of course, the ones that Gregor always thought about with longing when he was tired and getting into the damp bed in some small hotel room. All of them were usually very quiet nowadays. Soon after dinner, his father would go to sleep in his chair. His mother and sister would urge each other to be quiet. His mother, bent deeply under the lamp, would sew fancy underwear for a fashion shop. His sister, who had taken a sales job, learned shorthand and French in the evenings so that she might be able to get a better position later on. Sometimes his father would wake up and say to Gregor's mother, "You're doing too much sewing again today," as if he did not know that he had been dozing, and then he would go back to sleep again while mother and sister would exchange a tired grin. With a kind of stubbornness, Gregor's father refused to take his uniform off even at home. While his nightgown hung unused on its peg, Gregor's father would slumber where he was, fully dressed, as if always ready to serve, and expecting to hear the voice of his superior even here. The uniform had not been new to start with, but as a result of this it slowly became even shabbier, despite the efforts of Gregor's mother and sister to look after it. Gregor would often spend the whole evening looking at all the stains on this coat, with its gold buttons always kept polished and shiny, while the old man in it would sleep, highly uncomfortable, but peaceful. As soon as it struck 10, Gregor's mother would speak gently to his father to wake him and try to persuade him to go to bed, as he couldn't sleep properly where he was, and he really had to get his sleep if he was going to be up at 6 to get to work. But since he had been in work, he had become more obstinate, and would always insist on staying longer at the table, even though he regularly fell asleep, and it was then harder than ever to persuade him to exchange the chair for his bed. Then, however much mother and sister would importune him with little reproaches and warnings, he would keep slowly shaking his head for a quarter of an hour with his eyes closed and refusing to get up. Gregor's mother would tug at his sleeve, whisper endearments into his ear. Gregor's sister would leave her work to help her mother, but nothing would have any effect on him. He would just sink deeper into his chair. Only when the two women took him under the arms, he would abruptly open his eyes, look at them one after the other, and say, "What a life! This is what peace I get in my old age." And supported by the two women, he would lift himself up carefully, as if he were carrying the greatest load himself, let the women take him to the door, send them off, and carry on by himself, while Gregor's mother would throw down her needle and his sister her pen so that they could run after his father and continue being of help to him. Who in this tired and overworked family would have had time to give more attention to Gregor than was absolutely necessary? The household budget became even smaller, so now the maid was dismissed. An enormous, thick-boned charwoman with white hair that flapped around her head came every morning and evening to do the heaviest work. Everything else was looked after by Gregor's mother, on top of the large amount of sewing work she did. Gregor even learned, listening to the evening conversation, about what price they had hoped for, that several items of jewellery belonging to the family had been sold, even though both mother and sister had been very fond of wearing them at functions and celebrations. But the loudest complaint was that, although the flat was much too big for their present circumstances, they could not move out of it. There was no imaginable way of transferring Gregor to the new address. He could see quite well, though, that there were more reasons than consideration for him that made it difficult for them to move. It would have been quite easy to transport him in any suitable crate with a few air holes in it. The main thing holding the family back from their decision to move was much more to do with their total despair, and the thought that they had been struck with a misfortune unlike anything experienced by anyone else they knew or related to. They carried out absolutely everything that the world expects from poor people. Gregor's father brought bank employees their breakfast. His mother sacrificed herself by washing clothes for strangers. His sister ran back and forth behind her desk at the behest of the customers, but they just did not have the strength to do any more. And the injury in Gregor's back began to hurt as much as when it was new. After they had come back from taking his father to bed, Gregor's mother and sister would now leave their work where it was and sit close together, cheek to cheek. His mother would point to Gregor's room and say, "Close that door, Greta." And then, when he was in the dark again, they would sit in the next room and their tears would mingle, or they would simply sit there staring dry-eyed at the table. Gregor hardly slept at all, either night or day. Sometimes he would think of taking over the family's affairs, just like before, the next time the door was opened. He had long forgotten about his boss and the chief clerk, but they would appear again in his thoughts, the salesman and the apprentices, that stupid tea-boy, 2 or 3 friends from other businesses, one of the chambermaids from a provincial hotel, a tender memory that appeared and disappeared again, a cashier from a hat shop for whom his attention had been serious but too slow. All of them appeared to him, mixed together with strangers and others he had forgotten, but instead of helping him and his family, they were all of them inaccessible, and he was glad when they disappeared. Other times he was not at all in the mood to look after his family. He was filled with simple rage about the lack of attention he was shown, and although he could think of nothing he would have wanted, he made plans of how he would get into the pantry, where he could take all the things he was entitled to, even if he was not hungry. Gregor's sister no longer thought about how she could please him, but would hurriedly push some food or other into his room with her foot before she rushed out to work in the morning and at midday, and in the evening she would sweep it away again with the broom, indifferent as to whether it had been eaten or, more often than not, had been left totally untouched. She still cleared up the room in the evening, but now she could not have been any quicker about it. Smears of dirt were left on the walls. Here and there were little balls of dust and filth. At first, Gregor went into the worst of these places when his sister arrived as a reproach to her, but he could have stayed there for weeks without his sister doing anything about it. She could see the dirt as well as he could, but she had simply decided to leave him to it. At the same time, she became touchy in a way that was quite new for her, and which everyone in the family understood. Cleaning up Gregor's room was for her and her alone. Gregor's mother did once thoroughly clean his room, and needed to use several bucketfuls of water to do it, although that much dampness also made Gregor ill, and he lay flat on the couch, bitter and immobile. But his mother was to be punished still more for what she had done. As hardly had his sister arrived home in the evening than she noticed the change in Gregor's room, and, highly aggrieved, ran back into the living room where, despite her mother's raised and imploring hands, she broke into convulsive tears. Her father, of course, was startled out of his chair, and the 2 parents looked on, astonished and helpless. Then they too became agitated. Gregor's father, standing to the right of his mother, accused her of not leaving the cleaning of Gregor's room to his sister. From her left, Gregor's sister screamed at her that she was never to clean Gregor's room again, while his mother tried to draw his father, who was beside himself with anger, into the bedroom. His sister, quaking with tears, thumped on the table with her small fists, and Gregor hissed in anger that no one had even thought of closing the door to save him the sight of this and all its noise. Gregor's sister was exhausted from going out to work, and looking after Gregor as she had done before was even more work for her, but even so his mother ought certainly not to have taken her place. Gregor, on the other hand, ought not to be neglected. Now, though, the charwoman was here. This elderly widow with a robust bone structure that made her able to withstand the hardest of things in her long life wasn't really repelled by Gregor. Just by chance one day, rather than any real curiosity, she opened the door to Gregor's room and found herself face to face with him. He was taken totally by surprise. No one was chasing him, but he began to rush to and fro while she just stood there in amazement with her hands crossed in front of her. From then on, she never failed to open the door slightly every morning and look briefly in on him. At first, she would call to him, as she did so with words that she probably considered friendly, such as, "Come on then, you old dung beetle," or "Look at the old dung beetle there." Gregor never responded to being spoken to in that way, but just remained where he was without moving, as if the door had never been opened. If only they had told this charwoman to clean up his room every day, instead of letting her disturb him for no reason whenever she felt like it. One day, early in the morning, while a heavy rain struck the window panes, perhaps indicating that spring was coming, she began to speak to him in that way once again. Gregor was so resentful of it that he started to move towards her. He was slow and infirm, but it was like a kind of attack. Instead of being afraid, the charwoman just lifted up one of the chairs from near the door and stood there with her mouth open, clearly intending not to close her mouth until the chair in her hand had been slammed down into Gregor's back. "Aren't you coming any closer, then?" she asked when Gregor turned around again. She calmly put...
All right, so that is all that we are going to read for today. Pay attention to the changes that the family is starting to undergo, right? Our dynamic has definitely changed. Gregor is no longer the only one supporting the family, and in fact, he is not supporting the family at all. So how is that impacting himself? How is that impacting the family? And we are going to get into the next section, which you're going to see that continue. All right, so once you are all done with this video, make sure that you click on the reading quiz, and then you're going to see that you have a 9-question quiz. Make sure on the short responses, okay, that you write at least one full sentence, up to 3 full sentences, okay? All right, guys, have a lovely, lovely day. And if you have completed anything that you have a 0 in the grade book for, or that you have a no grade in the grade book for, make sure that you send me a message on Portal, and I will be putting in the rest of the Metamorphosis grades up through day 7. If I haven't for your class already. All right, guys. Bye.
The chair back in the corner.